As Clint walked down the sidewalk, he noticed a man sitting on the corner of the street. The man was older, with scruffy hair and worn-out clothes. His face had the roughness of someone who had lived a hard life, someone who had seen the darker side of the world. He was sitting with his knees drawn up to his chest, his hands clutching a cardboard sign that read, "Need help? Anything helps, please." Clint could feel a slight tug at his heart. He had seen many people in his life who had struggled, but something about this man struck a chord. He could tell that this man had nowhere to go, no family, no friends, just a solitary figure on the edge of society. As Clint neared, the man looked up. Their eyes met, and Clint could see the desperation in the man's eyes. His gaze was tired but still hopeful, like someone who hadn't quite given up on life, but was getting close. The man opened his mouth, as if gathering the strength to speak. "Excuse me, sir," the man said quietly, his voice shaking. "Can you give me $1?" Clint stopped in his tracks. The simplicity of the request caught him off guard. It wasn't a grand ask. It wasn't even for food or shelter. Just $1. Clint had been in situations where he had seen people ask for much more, but this was different. This man wasn't asking for a handout. He was asking for something small, something that could make him feel human again, just for a moment. Clint stood there, staring at the man, unsure of how to respond. He had lived a full life, a life full of highs and lows. He had seen fame, fortune, and success, but this moment, this encounter with a man who was so broken, hit him harder than he expected. Clint didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, looking at the man. It wasn't that he didn't want to help. It was that he didn't know how. How could $1 make a difference in this man's life? How could such a small gesture change anything in a world that had already dealt him so many blows? The man's eyes flickered to the ground, as if he knew he was asking too much. He didn't want to look Clint in the eye anymore. His face flushed with embarrassment, and he began to draw his knees tighter to his chest, as though preparing to disappear into the sidewalk. It was a type of shame Clint had seen in many people before, the kind that told you they didn't want to be a burden but had nowhere else to turn. "Don't be sorry," Clint said softly, his voice carrying a calmness that didn't match the storm of thoughts in his head. "I'm not mad at you." The man looked up again, surprised by Clint's kind tone. He seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "I'm just trying to get by," he said, his voice cracking. "I've been out here for weeks. I just need a little help. Just $1. Clint's heart sank as he watched the man's vulnerability unfold before him. He was a man who had lost everything, his pride, his dignity, and maybe even his hope. $1 seemed so insignificant, but in that moment, it felt like everything to the homeless man. Clint took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the man's words pressing down on him. It wasn't about the dollar. It wasn't even about the man's request. It was about the humanity that connected them both in this moment. Clint had experienced hardship in his own life, though never to this extent. But now, as he stood there, he understood something. This man was not just asking for money. He was asking for recognition, for a sign that anyone, still saw him as a person. Clint's mind raced as he considered his response. He could easily give the man $1, maybe even more. It was a small gesture for someone like him, someone who had the means to help. But there was a nagging feeling deep inside that told him this moment required something more than just money. The man wasn't asking for change to buy food or a drink. He wasn't asking for something tangible. He was asking for a connection, for a brief moment of dignity in a world that had stripped it away from him. Clint's eyes softened as he looked at the homeless man. He could tell that the man wasn't expecting a life-changing response. He wasn't expecting miracles. He just wanted to be seen. And in that moment, Clint realized that was exactly what he could give. He could offer this man the thing that was missing from his life: dignity. Clint reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and retrieved a $100 bill. He had already decided what he was going to do, but he didn't say anything yet. He just handed the money to the man, whose eyes widened in disbelief. "Here," Clint said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is for you. I'm not giving it to you because I feel sorry for you. I'm giving it to you because you deserve it. You deserve to be seen, and you deserve respect." The man's hands trembled as he took the money. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't speak. He simply looked at Clint, as if trying to process what had just happened. He wasn't used to this kind of kindness. He wasn't used to someone offering him respect instead of pity. Clint turned to walk away, but before he could take another step, the man called out to him. "Thank you. Thank you so much," he whispered, his voice breaking. Clint didn't look back, but he could hear the man's voice fading as he walked away. Clint Eastwood had seen his fair share of emotional moments in his life, both on screen and off. But something about this interaction stayed with him long after it was over. As he continued walking, he couldn't shake the image of the homeless man's face, the gratitude, and the shock that had filled his eyes when he had received that money. Clint had given the man more than just money. He had given him a reminder that he was still human, that he still mattered in a world that often ignored people like him. It was a small act, but it was one that had the power to change everything. It wasn't about the amount of money. It was about the message behind it. When Clint returned to his hotel room that evening, he reflected on the encounter. He wondered how many others in the world were out there, just like that man, hoping for a sign that they mattered. It made him think about the way society often overlooked the homeless, the poor, the forgotten. And he wondered if there was more that he could do, more that anyone could do, to make the world a more compassionate place. But as he sat in the quiet of his room, Clint knew one thing for sure. Today, he had made a difference. Even if it was just for a moment, he had given a man back his dignity. And in a world where so many people were stripped of that every day, it was something that truly mattered. As Clint lay down to sleep that night, he knew that his encounter with the homeless man would stay with him for a long time. It was a reminder of the power of simple kindness, the kind that didn't require a grand gesture, just a genuine human connection. And for Clint Eastwood, that was something worth remembering. The next morning, as Clint sipped his coffee, he couldn't help but think about the man he had met. He had given him more than just $1. He had given him a moment of humanity. And though Clint had moved on with his day, the encounter seemed to follow him wherever he went. It felt as if the homeless man had somehow left a mark on him, an impression that wouldn't fade. As the days passed, Clint continued his routine, but there were moments when he would pause and reflect on that brief interaction. The world had become so busy, so indifferent to the struggles of others. Yet in that moment, something pure had passed between them. Clint had been in many places, met countless people, but this man, this stranger, had touched something deep within him. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about the celebrity or the fame. It was about the fact that, in a world full of distractions, they had both taken the time to acknowledge each other's existence. In that small, fleeting moment, they had connected, and that connection had sparked something Clint couldn't quite explain. But as the days wore on, he began to notice something else. People around him were reacting to his act of kindness. The city seemed to shift a little, and Clint couldn't help but wonder if it had anything to do with what had happened. Could something as small as helping a stranger make a difference in the larger world? One evening, Clint went out for a walk again, this time with a sense of purpose. He didn't know exactly what he was searching for, but he knew that the world could use more kindness, more recognition of one another's humanity. As he walked down the same street, he saw another person sitting on the corner. This time, it wasn't the same man, but Clint couldn't help but approach. This person, a young woman, was sitting with her head down, clutching a sign that read, "Please help, no home, no food." Clint paused, his eyes scanning the sign before looking at her. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with the same defeated look Clint had seen on the man days earlier. Without hesitation, Clint approached her. He didn't need to ask for her story or what she needed. He could see the pain in her eyes, the exhaustion. But he could also see the spark of hope, just like the man he had met before. This time, it wasn't just $1 he handed her. It was a message. "Here," Clint said quietly, handing her a $100 bill, just as he had done for the man. "You're not alone in this world. Don't forget that." She looked up at him, shocked and overwhelmed. She couldn't believe it. Her lips trembled as she tried to find words, but all that came out was a soft, "Thank you. Thank you so much." Clint simply nodded and walked away, not looking for recognition, not looking for gratitude. He wasn't doing this to make a statement. He was doing it because it felt right. And in that moment, as he continued down the street, he knew that something had shifted. Something had changed within him, and maybe, just maybe, he could help spark a change in others too. Clint didn't expect much from his encounters with the homeless, but in the days following, something unexpected began to happen. People started noticing the small acts of kindness. News outlets started picking up stories of Clint's interactions with the homeless, and it quickly became a topic of discussion among his fans and beyond. Social media erupted with posts praising Clint for his gesture, with many expressing that his actions were a reminder of the humanity that still existed in the world. Soon, it wasn't just Clint's kindness that people were talking about. It was the ripple effect his actions had triggered. People who had seen his act of generosity started sharing their own stories of helping others. One person posted about how they had helped a struggling mother at the grocery store. Another shared about buying food for a homeless man they saw on the street. It was as if Clint's simple act had opened the floodgates for kindness to flow once more. Clint was humbled by the response. He had never intended to start a movement, never thought that a simple gesture would lead to so much attention. But as he read through the messages and stories from people all over the world, he realized that this was exactly the kind of change the world needed. It wasn't grand gestures or celebrity endorsements that made a difference. It was the everyday acts of kindness that had the power to heal and unite. The media caught wind of the stories too, and soon Clint was being interviewed about the impact of his actions. It wasn't about the money anymore. The story had evolved into something bigger, something more powerful. It was about the way people treated one another, about recognizing the value in every person, no matter their circumstances. Clint's response to all the attention was simple. "I didn't do it for the praise. I did it because it felt like the right thing to do." And that was what made Clint's actions resonate with so many people. It wasn't about self-promotion or seeking accolades. It was about seeing a fellow human being in need and offering them something valuable, whether it was money, a kind word, or just a moment of acknowledgement. Months passed, and Clint's life returned to normal. He continued making movies, attending events, and living his life as he always had. But something had changed. The man he had met on the street, the woman he had helped, these were the faces he carried with him. They had become part of him, and their stories had fueled his desire to see the world through a different lens. Clint knew he could never solve the problem of homelessness, but he had come to understand something important. Sometimes the simplest actions had the biggest impact. A single dollar, a kind gesture, could change someone's entire perspective. It could remind them that they were seen, that they mattered. But even more than that, Clint had learned that the world could be a better place if everyone just took a moment to treat others with kindness and respect. It wasn't about grand acts or famous names. It was about the everyday person making a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. As Clint continued his life, he carried the lessons of that encounter with him. And while he may not have realized it at the time, his simple act of kindness had ignited a spark in the hearts of many. A small act of humanity had turned into a movement, one that spread hope and compassion to places that needed it most. The world had become a little bit kinder, and Clint Eastwood had become more than just a legendary actor. He had become a symbol of how one person's actions could change everything, and that was his true legacy. As months turned into years, Clint Eastwood's simple act of kindness continued to ripple through the world. People who had never even met him began to follow in his footsteps, realizing that small acts of generosity could make a significant difference in their communities. What started as one encounter on a street corner grew into a movement that spread across the country and even around the globe. Clint's life had changed in ways he had never expected. He had always been known for his roles in iconic movies, playing tough characters with a strong moral compass. But now, people were recognizing him for something much more important than any of his roles on the screen. They saw him as someone who cared, someone who used his fame not for personal gain, but to remind the world of the importance of kindness. The media continued to follow the story. News outlets and talk shows regularly referenced Clint's act of kindness, using it as a shining example of the power of one person to make a difference. His message resonated with people from all walks of life. You don't have to be a billionaire, a politician, or a world leader to create change. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment of empathy. One of the most profound moments in Clint's journey came when a young woman, a single mother who had seen his story on the news, decided to give back. She had been struggling to make ends meet, but seeing Clint's simple gesture gave her a new perspective on life. She began volunteering at a local shelter, helping other mothers who were going through similar struggles. Soon, she was organizing community events to raise funds and awareness for the homeless. She told anyone who would listen that it all started with Clint Eastwood's kindness. Her story wasn't unique. Across the country, more and more people were following his lead, inspired to help others in whatever way they could. The homeless population, though still a pressing issue, began to feel a sense of connection to the world around them. More shelters were opened, more people were offering their time, and more individuals were stepping up to help those in need. Clint's message of kindness and humanity had a profound impact on many people. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on his own family. His children, who had grown up in the shadow of his fame, began to see him in a new light. They were proud of their father, not for his fame or wealth, but for the way he used his platform to make the world a better place. They saw how people's lives were changed because of his simple act of compassion, and it encouraged them to give back in their own ways. His son, Scott, began working with nonprofit organizations that provided food and shelter to the homeless. His daughter, Allison, started a program to help young people in foster care find stability and support. Clint's example had not only shaped his own life, but had influenced the next generation to carry on the legacy of kindness. But as the years passed, Clint never sought out the recognition. He didn't want to be remembered as a hero or a saint. He simply wanted people to understand that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change the world. He often said in interviews, "I didn't do it for the praise. I did it because I knew it was the right thing to do." His humility only endeared him more to those who followed his journey. People came to understand that Clint Eastwood wasn't just an actor. He was a man of principle, someone who practiced what he preached. His legacy wasn't just about his films or his fame, but about the lasting impact he had on the world through his compassion. Years after the incident, Clint found himself in a position to reflect on how far he had come. He was invited to an event dedicated to honoring individuals who had made significant contributions to society through acts of kindness. Clint, ever humble, wasn't sure he deserved such an honor, but he agreed to attend. As he sat in the crowd, listening to stories of others who had impacted their communities, something stirred within him. He realized that the homeless man he had met on that fateful day had sparked something in him that he never could have predicted. What he had thought was a simple interaction had turned into a profound journey, one that had touched countless lives. When it was Clint's turn to speak, the audience waited with bated breath. Clint stepped up to the microphone, and for the first time, he allowed himself to reflect on the full scope of what had happened. He spoke about the importance of human connection, of seeing the person beyond the label, beyond the struggles they might be facing. "I'm just a man," Clint began, his voice steady but emotional. "I did what I thought was right. I gave $1 to a man who asked for it, but it wasn't about the money. It was about seeing him as a human being. I didn't change his life, but I reminded him he wasn't invisible. And in doing so, I learned something important. We all have the power to make a difference. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to have millions of dollars. All you need is a willingness to help." The crowd fell silent. Clint's words hung in the air, and for many, it was a moment of reflection. They realized that they, too, could make a difference. It didn't matter who they were or what they had. It mattered that they cared, and that was the message that would continue to resonate long after the event ended. Clint Eastwood's act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction that showed no signs of slowing down. In the years that followed, countless others had followed his example, and many had been inspired to act in ways that made the world a kinder place. The message was clear. One simple gesture could spark a movement. And while Clint never sought recognition, he had created a lasting legacy, not through the fame he had earned in Hollywood, but through the difference he made in the lives of people who needed it most. The homeless man Clint had helped that day may have gone on with his life, but Clint's life had been changed forever by the encounter. It was a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness could have the largest impact. It was a reminder that no one was ever too small to make a difference. And for Clint, that was the most important role he'd ever played.